Maribel Lawson grabbed her sister's arm right there on the church steps in front of everyone and shoved the water bucket out of Evelyn's hands. It crashed against the stone. The water spread across the ground. The crowd went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then the laughter came. "Stay back," Maribel said loud enough for the whole street to hear. "You smell like the stable." Evelyn did not cry. She bent down, picked up the bucket, and kept walking. Not one person stepped forward. Not one. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel right now and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The laughter was still echoing off the church walls when Evelyn reached the water trough at the far end of the yard. She set the bucket down, steadied her hands against the rough wood edge, breathed once, slow and deliberate, the way a person breathes when they have learned through long years of practice not to let anything show on their face. Around her, the Sunday gathering of Red Hollow, Texas, continued exactly as it always did. Women in pressed dresses clustered near the front steps. Men stood in groups talking cattle prices and rainfall. Children chased each other between the wagon wheels. And Maribel Lawson stood at the center of it all, already laughing about something else already, the sun that every eye in town orbited around. Evelyn refilled the bucket from the trough, started back toward the side door of the church hall, where the older women needed water for the midday meal preparation. She passed within 3 feet of her cousin Dorothy, who looked directly at her and then turned away to resume her conversation without a word. She passed the Hatcher brothers, who were 16 and 17, and thought it was funny to whisper "stable girl" just loud enough for her to hear. She passed Reverend Moore's wife, who gave her a thin smile. The kind of smile that means "I see you, but I'm not going to embarrass myself by being seen with you." Evelyn kept walking. She was 26 years old. She had been walking this particular gauntlet every Sunday for the better part of 10 years, ever since their mother died, and the difference between the two Lawson sisters had become the town's favorite quiet joke. Before that, they had been simply two girls. After that, they had been a lesson. One daughter had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's charm, and the other had inherited, well, the work. The Lawson property sat 2 miles east of Red Hollow's main street. 40 acres of decent grazing land, a farmhouse that had seen better decades, a stable that Evelyn kept running through sheer stubbornness, and a small operation of horses and cattle that should have been modest but profitable if it had been managed with any consistency. It had not been managed with consistency. Not by anyone except Evelyn. Her father, Gerald Lawson, had the kind of personality that made people like him immediately, and trust him gradually, and regret that trust slowly over time. He was good at conversation, good at appearing busy, good at promising tomorrow what he could not deliver today. He had spent 15 years borrowing against the property's potential and delivering against none of it. And somewhere in those 15 years, Evelyn had quietly become the one who kept the whole thing from falling apart. She rose before dawn. She fed the animals. She tracked the accounts. The real accounts, not the ones her father showed people when he needed to look solvent. She negotiated with the grain supplier because her father always forgot to, and with the farrier because her father always underpaid him, and with the bank twice a year because her father always missed the payment window. Maribel did not do these things. Maribel had been raised by some unspoken family agreement that no one had ever directly articulated to be the face of the Lawson name. She dressed well. She spoke well. She attended every social function. She smiled at the right men and laughed at the right moments, and made the Lawson name feel like something worth knowing. It was Evelyn's labor that paid for all of it. This was not a secret. It simply was not discussed. She was still moving water between the kitchen and the hall when she heard the first whisper about a stranger in town. "Arrived last night," said one of the kitchen women, Mrs. Alderman, whose husband ran the general store. "Stayed at the Pendleton. Caleb Whitmore." The name meant nothing to Evelyn. She set down the bucket and reached for the ladle. "From Denver." Mrs. Alderman continued, lowering her voice in the way that meant the information was both reliable and exciting. "Owns 3 ranch operations up north. They say he's worth more than anyone in this county combined." "What does he want here?" asked the other woman at the counter. "Grazing rights. The old Halcott corridor land between the river and the ridge. There's a dispute about who holds the deed been sitting in county court for 2 years. Whitmore's apparently been buying up surrounding parcels, and he needs that corridor to connect them. Evelyn listened. She knew the Halcott corridor. She had actually looked at those deed records once 2 summers ago when her father had briefly entertained the idea of acquiring some of the adjacent land. The county filing system was a disaster, but the underlying ownership questions were not as complicated as people made them sound. Someone just needed to read the original survey documents instead of the derivative claims that had been filed on top of them. She filed this away in the back of her mind and went back to carrying water. She first saw Caleb Whitmore at 40 feet of distance across the churchyard, and she registered him the way she registered most things, practically without embellishment. He was tall. He carried himself with the particular straightness of someone who worked physically and was not self-conscious about it. His clothes were good quality, but not new. His hat had actual wear marks on the brim. He was listening to Mayor Croft speak with the expression of a man who is politely processing information he already has. He did not look like what Evelyn had imagined when she heard the words "wealthy ranch owner" from Denver. She had expected something more performative, more like her father. He caught her eye across the yard for approximately 1 second before she looked away. She thought nothing of it. She went back to work. Maribel found her 20 minutes later behind the stable where Evelyn was checking on a gray mare that had been favoring her left foreleg since Thursday. "He's here," Maribel said. She was still in her church dress, her hair pinned perfectly, her cheeks flushed with something that was half excitement and half authority. "Caleb Whitmore. Have you seen him?" "Briefly," Evelyn said. She ran her hand down the mare's leg, still warm, still swollen around the fetlock. She had the mare on a poultice twice a day, but it was slow going. "He's been introduced around. The mayor took him to meet the Hargrove family and then the Beaumont family." Maribel paused. "He hasn't asked about our family yet." "Why would he?" "Because we're the Lawsons." Maribel said it the way you state an obvious fact. "And because Father told me this morning that Whitmore's looking at the Halcott corridor land, and we have information about those deed records that could be useful to him." Evelyn straightened. "What information does Father have about the deed records?" Maribel waved her hand slightly. "He knows people who know things." "Father doesn't know anything about the Halcott deed records. I'm the one who looked at them." A pause. Maribel tilted her head. "Well then, you can share what you know when Father introduces us." "Maribel, I'm not going to sit in a meeting and feed information to Father so he can present it as his own." No one said, "That's exactly what you said?" Evelyn turned back to the horse. "I'm busy." Maribel was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what your problem is. You could be useful to this family if you stopped being so proud about how you're useful." Evelyn didn't answer. "He could help us," Maribel continued. "A connection like this, a man like this, it could change everything for the family. But you're going to stand out here with your horse and your pride and let that chance walk right past." "I'm not standing here with pride," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm standing here because this horse is injured, and if I don't treat her properly, she'll be lame by winter. That's not pride. That's just the work." Maribel left without answering. The mare turned her head and pressed her nose against Evelyn's shoulder the way horses do when they trust you. Evelyn stayed a while longer. The first time Caleb Whitmore actually spoke to Evelyn was the following Tuesday morning, and it was not arranged by anyone. She was at the feed supply lot at the edge of town, loading a 100-pound sack of oats into the back of the wagon, doing it herself, because the supply boy had twisted his ankle, and she was not going to wait 2 days for someone else to be available. She had the sack halfway up when she felt it shift wrong, the weight redistributing toward the far edge, and she adjusted her grip, heaved it up the last foot, and got it settled in the wagon bed, just as a second set of hands arrived on the other end. She turned. Caleb Whitmore was standing beside her wagon, one hand still on the sack, looking at her with a direct and uncomplicated expression. "You had it," he said. "I could see that. But the angle was wrong." Evelyn looked at him, then at the sack, then back at him. "The angle was fine," she said. "If you say so." He didn't argue it. He just stepped back. "You're Evelyn Lawson." "Yes." "Your father mentioned you might be able to help with some information about the Halcott corridor deed records." He paused. "He said you'd looked at them." So her father had used it anyway. She kept her face neutral. "He told you I had information." "He told me he had information, and that his daughter had helped compile it." Caleb's voice was even, but the way he said daughter made me think he was talking about you and not about the other one. Evelyn blinked. "Why?" "Because the other one was in the room, and she didn't look like she'd ever compiled anything." He said it without any particular judgment, just observation. "I'm not trying to go around your father. I'm just trying to find the person who actually knows what they're talking about." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Around them, the town moved through its Tuesday morning. A cart rattled past. Someone called to someone across the street. Ordinary sounds. "The Halcott corridor deed records have 3 layers," she said finally. "The original 1847 survey, the 1859 partition filing, which has an error in the eastern boundary description, and the 1874 derivative claim, which everyone's been arguing about. But the 1874 claim is built on the 1859 filing, which means it inherited the boundary error. If you correct for the actual survey line instead of the described line, the corridor ownership question looks completely different." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "How long did it take you to figure that out?" he asked. "Afternoon at the county records office. The documents were all there. Nobody had bothered to read them in sequence." Another silence. "Would you be willing to look at them again?" he asked. "With me present. Why?" "Because I'm going to need to present this to a county arbitration panel, and I'd rather have the person who actually understands it explaining it than have me trying to repeat what someone told me." Evelyn picked up the lead rope on the wagon horse, checking the harness buckle out of habit. "My father won't like it," she said. "Is that a no?" She thought about the mare with the swollen leg. She thought about the grain account she needed to settle by Friday. She thought about 10 years of her name being used to prop up things she was never credited for building. "Thursday morning," she said. 8 o'clock. The county records office. He nodded once. "I'll be there." She did not tell her father about the meeting. She did not tell Maribel. She told no one, and she thought about it very little because thinking about it too much would make it feel like something significant. And she had learned long ago that giving significance to things before they earned it was how people got hurt. But on Wednesday evening, while she was doing the account books by lamplight, she found herself looking at the row of numbers. The real numbers. The ones that showed what the Lawson property actually was, versus what her father claimed it was. And she thought about what Caleb Whitmore had said. "I'm just trying to find the person who actually knows what they're talking about." Nobody had ever said that to her before. Not her father, not her sister, not the men in town who had hired her help and then thanked her father for it. Not one person in Red Hollow had ever looked directly at her and said, "I want the person who knows what they're talking about, and I think that person is you." She closed the account book, trimmed the lamp, went to bed. She lay in the dark and told herself it meant nothing, but her hands pressed flat against the quilt felt more steady than they had in a long time. The county records office on Thursday morning smelled like old paper and dust and the particular staleness of documents that have not seen daylight in years. Evelyn arrived at 7:50. She had the relevant filing numbers already written in her small notebook. She had been there before. The clerk knew her. Caleb arrived at 7:58. He came in without ceremony, nodded to her, set his hat on the table and said, "Walk me through it." So she did. She laid out the 1847 survey first, showed him the eastern boundary markers, 2 specific creek bends that were named in the original document. Then she pulled the 1859 partition filing and showed him exactly where the boundary description had diverged, not dramatically, but by enough. Whoever had written the 1859 document had worked from memory or from a secondary drawing rather than from the original survey, and they had transposed 2 landmarks which shifted the described line approximately 40 feet eastward from where it actually ran. 40 feet, Caleb said. 40 feet along a corridor that runs 2.5 miles, Evelyn said, which if you calculate the area differential is about 6 acres of grazing land that is currently being claimed under the wrong deed entirely. Caleb leaned back. Who currently holds the 1874 claim? The Beaumont family. They acquired it in 1881 from a land speculator who had acquired it in 1878. And they know about the survey discrepancy. Evelyn looked at him. Do they know? He asked again. I think the people who sold them the 1874 claim knew, she said carefully. Whether the Beaumonts know what they bought, I can't say. But you could document the discrepancy. Anyone could document it. The records are right here. You just have to read all of them instead of starting in 1874. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He looked at the documents spread across the table. Then he looked at her. Evelyn, he said. How long have you been doing work like this? She wasn't sure what he meant by like this. Looking at records. Doing the actual work, for your family, behind the scenes. The question landed in a strange place. Not uncomfortable exactly, just unexpected. A while, she said. Does anyone thank you for it? The silence that followed was its own answer. Caleb nodded slowly. He looked at the documents again. I'm going to need these properly copied and submitted to the arbitration panel. I'd like to retain you formally as a consultant with payment to prepare that filing. Evelyn stared at him. Consultants are lawyers or surveyors? Consultants are people who know what they're talking about. He met her eyes. You know what you're talking about. She was quiet for a long moment. My father will say you should be dealing with him. Your father doesn't know what the 1859 boundary description says. No, he doesn't. Do you want the work or not? She did. She wanted it in the way that she wanted very few things, not with excitement exactly, but with a deep and solid certainty that this was something real and something earned and something that could not be taken back once it was done. Yes, she said. I want the work. The town found out, as towns always find out, through the side door of everything, through a word here and a look there and a conversation overheard at the wrong moment. By Friday afternoon, the general knowledge in Red Hollow was this: Caleb Whitmore, the wealthy ranchman from Denver, had hired Evelyn Lawson to do document work for his land arbitration case. Not Gerald Lawson, not Maribel Lawson. Evelyn, the stable girl, the dust-covered one, the one no one wanted. The reaction was not outrage, not yet. It was something quieter and stranger than outrage. It was the particular discomfort of a town that had organized itself around a very specific story. The beautiful Lawson sister, the polished family name, the pecking order that everyone understood, and was now being asked to look at that story from a different angle. People did not know what to do with that, so they talked. Mrs. Alderman mentioned to 3 separate people that it was very unusual for a man of Whitmore's standing to work directly with a girl who had no professional credentials. Reverend Moore's wife suggested, in the careful language of someone who wants to imply something without saying it, that perhaps there was a personal element to Whitmore's interest that explained the business arrangement. The Hatcher brothers, with their 16 and 17 years of wisdom, said that Whitmore was probably just using her for information and would turn back to Maribel once the legal work was done. And Maribel herself, Maribel did not say anything in public. But that Friday evening in the kitchen of the Lawson house, she said to Evelyn, "You should have told me he was going to offer you work." "I didn't know he was going to offer me work," Evelyn said. She was cleaning the stove grate. She did this every Friday. "You could have told me about the county records. I could have been the one to present them." Evelyn looked up. "You've never been to the county records office." "I could have gone." "Maribel, you don't know what a survey boundary description is." "I could have learned." "In 2 days." A pause. Maribel's jaw was tight. "He's going to be at the founders' dinner next week. Maribel said. "The whole town will be there. You understand what it looks like." "I understand what I did," Evelyn said. She went back to the grate. "I found the right documents, and I explained them to someone who needed to understand them. That's what I was hired to do. What it looks like is not my concern. It should be. No." She set down the cleaning brush, looked at her sister directly. "It really shouldn't. Not anymore." Maribel left the kitchen. Evelyn finished cleaning the stove. Outside, the horses moved in the stable. The wind came up from the east. And somewhere in town, Caleb Whitmore was reading through the documents she had copied for him. Documents that bore her careful handwriting and her name, Evelyn Lawson, Consultant, at the top of every page. For the first time in a long time, she went to sleep without checking whether she had forgotten something. She hadn't forgotten anything. For once, she had been the one who was remembered. The Founders' Dinner was held every year in the Pendleton Hotel's main hall, and it was the kind of event where Red Hollow dressed itself up and pretended for one evening to be more than it was. The tables had white cloths. The chandelier got cleaned. The mayor gave a speech that ran 12 minutes too long and said nothing new, and everyone applauded at the right moments, because that was what you did. Evelyn had attended every year since she was 16. She sat at the edge of the Lawson family table in whatever dress was clean and pressed, and she ate her meal quietly and went home at a reasonable hour. And the next morning the horses still needed feeding, and the accounts still needed attention, and the evening was already forgotten by the time the sun came up. This year felt different before it even started. She knew it when she walked in, and the room did not ignore her the way it usually did. People noticed her. Not warmly, not that. But they noticed. There was a quality to the attention that she recognized from years of being whispered about, a kind of sideways awareness, like when a room collectively knows something and is waiting to see what the subject of that knowledge will do. She took her usual seat at the edge of the Lawson table. Her father was already holding court with two men she didn't recognize, business acquaintances of someone she assumed, or men he was trying to make into business acquaintances. He did not look at her when she sat down. Maribel was across the table, impeccable, speaking with the mayor's wife, with the careful attention of someone who is performing graciousness rather than feeling it. Caleb Whitmore was at a table near the front. He was seated beside the county arbitration clerk, and they were talking in the low, direct way of people who have actual business to discuss rather than social performance to maintain. He had a glass of water, not whiskey. He had not touched his bread. He looked up once while she was looking at him, and he nodded a single brief acknowledgement and then went back to his conversation. Her father caught that nod. She saw his eyes track from Caleb back to her with the particular calculating expression that meant he was reconfiguring something in his head. Gerald Lawson was not a stupid man. He was a careless one, which was different. And when he saw an opportunity taking shape in a direction he hadn't planned for, he was capable of pivoting fast. He leaned toward her before the first course arrived. "Whitmore seems comfortable with you," he said low enough that only she could hear. "We've done business," Evelyn said. "I know that." A pause. He adjusted his cuffs. "I want you to speak with him tonight, about the grazing rights extension. There's a second parcel north of the Halcott corridor that I've been looking at, and if Whitmore's expanding his operation—" "Father, I'm just asking you to mention it. You're asking me to use a professional relationship to broker a land deal for you without telling Whitmore that's what I'm doing." She kept her voice level. "That's not something I'm going to do." Gerald looked at her. His expression shifted through three different things in 2 seconds: surprise, irritation, and then something that settled into the careful blankness of a man recalculating. "You've gotten very particular lately," he said. "I've always been particular," Evelyn said. "You just didn't notice because it didn't affect you before." The soup arrived. The conversation ended. But across the table, Maribel had heard enough of it to understand the shape of what had been said, and the look she gave Evelyn was the kind of look that meant a conversation was coming later, whether Evelyn wanted it or not. The dinner moved through its courses. The mayor gave his speech. People applauded. The chandelier threw its careful light across the white tablecloths, and the good dresses and the performances of respectability that everyone in the room was sustaining with varying degrees of effort. Evelyn ate her meal and watched and said nothing. Then Caleb Whitmore stood up. He hadn't been announced. He hadn't asked the mayor for the floor. He simply stood, and the room registered his height and his stillness, and went quiet by instinct, the way rooms do around people who don't need permission to be heard. "I want to thank the town of Red Hollow for its hospitality this week," he said. His voice was unhurried. "I also want to make a public correction because I believe in doing business transparently, and I've heard some inaccurate things said about the land arbitration work that's currently underway." The room went very still. "There has been some confusion," Caleb continued, "about who is providing the documentary research for the Halcott corridor case. I want to be clear, the research was done by Evelyn Lawson, not by a legal firm, not by a surveyor I brought from Denver. By a woman in this town who sat down with documents that have been available to everyone for 40 years and actually read them." Evelyn did not move. She was not sure she was breathing. She identified a boundary discrepancy that changes the shape of this case entirely, Caleb said. "And she did it in an afternoon. I want that on record, because when the arbitration panel issues its ruling, her work is going to be part of the basis for that ruling, and the people who did that work should be known." He sat down. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds, which, in a room full of people, is a very long time. Then the murmuring started. Not applause, not hostility, something more complicated than either the sound of a room trying to process information that doesn't fit the shape of the story it's been telling. Evelyn felt her father's stillness beside her. Felt Maribel's gaze across the table like a physical pressure. Felt the eyes of everyone who had called her the stable girl, and the dust-covered one, and the sister no one wanted all turning in her direction, and she kept her spine straight and her face still and did not give them anything they could use. She had learned that early. Give them nothing. Give them the same face they get from a wall. But underneath the stillness, something was moving, something that felt dangerously like hope. She crushed it before it could get any larger. Hope was expensive, and she had learned not to carry more of it than she could afford to lose. After the dinner ended and the tables began to empty, Caleb moved through the room in the direction of the door, and passed close enough to the Lawson table that he could stop if he wanted to. He stopped. "Good evening," he said. He was addressing the table generally, which meant he could have been speaking to anyone. But he was looking at Evelyn. Gerald rose immediately, hand extended. "Whitmore, wonderful remarks tonight." "Thank you, Gerald." Caleb shook the hand efficiently. Then, "Evelyn, the filing goes to the panel clerk on Monday. If you have a chance to review the final copy tomorrow, I'd appreciate it." "I'll come by the Pendleton at 9, she said. "Good." He nodded to the table. He left. Gerald sat back down. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that in a man like Gerald Lawson meant the recalibration was complete and the new strategy was already in motion. "I misjudged some things," he said finally. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular. "About how this was going to go." Maribel said nothing. Evelyn picked up her glass, finished her water, and stood to leave. "Evelyn," her father said. She paused. "You did well." He said it to the table. But she heard it. She left without answering. Some things you don't reward with a response. Outside, the night air was cool and dry and clean, and she stood for a moment on the Pendleton's front step and let herself breathe without being watched. She had been right to crush the hope earlier. She let a small piece of it back. Just a small piece. The next morning she arrived at the Pendleton at 9, and Caleb had the filing spread on the table in his room. The sitting room door open entirely proper, and they went through it page by page, the way they had gone through the original documents, efficiently and without ceremony. Each of them focused on the work, rather than on the fact of being in the same room doing it together. This was something she noticed about him gradually. Across the hours of working together that week, he treated the work as the thing. Not her gender, not her family name, not the gap between his resources and hers. The work was the thing, and whoever was competent at the work was the person he wanted doing it. It was a remarkably uncomplicated approach, and it was so unfamiliar to her that for the first 2 days she kept waiting for the other part, the condition, but the qualification that would reveal what this was actually going to cost her. No condition came. On the 3rd page of the final filing, she found an error. Small one. The parcel reference number on the 2nd exhibit had been transposed. "Here," she said, tapping it. Caleb looked, saw it immediately, made the correction without commentary. "How did you catch that?" he asked. "I always read numbers twice," she said. "Where did you learn that?" "Bank statements." She turned the page. "When the numbers are wrong, and you're the one responsible for fixing them, you learn to read them twice." A pause. "How long have you been managing your family's finances?" he asked. She looked up. He was watching her with the direct, uncomplicated attention that she still hadn't gotten entirely used to. "Since I was 18, she said. 8 years. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does your family know what the actual financial position of the property is?" The question was careful, not invasive. He had no right to that information, and he knew it, but he was asking something underneath the question, something she could feel the shape of, even if she couldn't see it directly. "My father knows what he wants to know," she said. "My sister knows what my father tells her. And the actual position." She weighed this. Telling him was a kind of vulnerability. Not telling him was a kind of dishonesty, and she had not made it 8 years managing real accounts by being dishonest about numbers. "We're solvent," she said. "Marginally. The property has good fundamentals, but we've been running on borrowed credibility for a long time. If 1 or 2 things broke the wrong way in the same year, we'd be in trouble." Caleb nodded slowly. He was looking at the filing again, but she could tell he was thinking about something else. "The Halcott Corridor ruling," he said. "When it comes through, and it will come through based on this documentation, there's going to be a reconfiguration of grazing access in this area. Some operations will benefit. Some will be hurt depending on what their current arrangements are." "I know. The Lawson property's eastern pasture runs adjacent to the corridor." "I know that too." He looked at her again. "I want to make sure you're positioned correctly when this happens. Not your father, you." Evelyn set down her pen. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I'd like to discuss a formal grazing rights arrangement with you, not with Gerald, for the eastern pasture access. A fair arrangement documented properly that protects your operation regardless of what anyone else decides to do with the family's other business." The room was very quiet. "You'd be dealing with me instead of the property owner of record," she said. "I'd be dealing with the person who actually runs the property," he said. "If your father agrees to the arrangement, the paperwork can reflect whatever names are appropriate. But I want the negotiation to be with you." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She thought about every arrangement her father had ever made on behalf of the property, the ones she'd had to clean up after, the promises that didn't hold, the margins that had gotten thinner every year because Gerald Lawson was better at spending credibility than building it. She thought about what it would mean to have one arrangement, just one that was solid. That had been negotiated by someone who actually understood what was being agreed to. "My father will want to be involved," she said. "That's between you and your father. I'll have the same conversation with him that I'm having with you if you want me to. But the terms I'm offering are based on what I know about how that property is actually run." He paused. "The terms will reflect reality. Your father may find that uncomfortable." She almost smiled. "He'll find it very uncomfortable." "Probably." He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his expression that wasn't quite neutral anymore. "Do you want to do this?" She thought about the account books, the real ones, the column of numbers that had held the Lawson property together year after year, through carelessness and bad luck, and the particular exhausting entropy of a family that spent its energy performing prosperity instead of building it. "Yes," she said. "I want to do this." Gerald did not take it well. That was not a surprise. What was a surprise was the form that not taking it well assumed, because Gerald Lawson, when cornered, did not shout. He went very quiet and very reasonable, and that was in some ways harder to deal with than anger. "I understand what you are trying to do," he said that evening. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his hands folded on top, a posture she associated with him, making himself look smaller than he was, so the other person would let their guard down. "You feel like you've been undercredited, and that's fair. I know I haven't always. I know things could have been handled differently." "This isn't about credit," Evelyn said. She was standing. She didn't sit down because sitting down would make this a conversation, and she needed it to be a statement. "This is about the Eastern Pasture Arrangement having terms that are actually enforceable and that don't disappear in 6 months because someone made a handshake deal and then forgot the handshake. Whitmore is a serious man. He wouldn't—" "It's not Whitmore I'm worried about." She said it plainly, not cruelly, just plainly. "I want the arrangement documented with me as the operational manager of record. That's all." Gerald was quiet. "You're cutting me out," he said. "I'm cutting out the part where you make the deal and I implement it, and then when it goes wrong, I have no standing to fix it." She kept her voice even. "You'll still own the property. This is an operational arrangement. It just finally reflects who's actually operating it." Another silence. "Maribel won't like this," he said. "Maribel doesn't work the Eastern Pasture. She's going to think you're trying to take something from the family. I'm trying to keep the family from losing it." She pulled out the chair across from him, sat down, and put the account books on the table, the real ones. "Sit with me for an hour, Father. Look at these numbers. Tell me I'm wrong." Gerald looked at the account books. His expression shifted through something complicated, recognition maybe, or the particular discomfort of a man seeing in clear arithmetic what he has always known in the vague background of his awareness and chosen not to examine directly. He did not look for long. "Do what you need to do," he said quietly. It was not a blessing. It was not quite surrender. But it was the most Gerald Lawson had ever acknowledged about the thing that Evelyn had been doing quietly for 8 years, and she took it for what it was and left the table before he could qualify it. The next morning, she told Caleb the arrangement was agreed. They were standing outside the county records office. The day was bright, and there was wind coming off the flat land to the west, the kind of wind that smells like dry grass and distance, and she had slept better the night before than she had in 2 years. "Your father signed off," Caleb asked. "He said to do what I need to do." That's probably the most useful thing he could have said. "Yes?" She paused. "He looked at the account books." Caleb looked at her. "That's new." "It is." She didn't elaborate on what that had cost either of them. He was quiet for a moment. Around them, Red Hollow went about its Tuesday morning with its carts and its conversations and its careful social machinery. 2 women from the church auxiliary passed on the opposite side of the street and looked at them and then looked away with the precise speed of people who want to be seen noticing without being seen staring. "People are talking," Evelyn said. "People are always talking," Caleb said. "About this specifically. About—" She paused. "About why you're spending time with me instead of with the family, Maribel." She said it straight because anything else would have been cowardly. She had not gotten 8 years into running an operation on her own by being cowardly about uncomfortable things. Caleb considered this. "What are they saying?" he asked. "A range of things. That you're using me for information and it's temporary. That there's something—" She stopped. "Something other than business going on." "What do you think?" he asked. "I think I don't particularly care what they're saying." She meant it. "I care about the work. The work is real and it's mine, and I know what I did. What the town decides to make of it is not something I can control." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," he said. "The business is real. The work is real. That's what I'm here for." "I know." A pause. "That's the only thing you're here for?" she asked. She didn't know exactly why she asked it. She had not planned to. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "Probably not the only thing." He said it with the same directness he gave to everything, no flourish, no performance, no attempt to make it more or less than what it was. Evelyn looked back at him and said nothing because she didn't have words for what she was thinking yet, and she was not in the habit of speaking before she had words. But something in her chest had shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way things shift in stories. Not a sudden breaking open. Not a gasp. Nothing that looked like anything from the outside. Just a quiet internal rearrangement. Like a door opening that had been closed so long you'd forgotten it was a door. She looked away first. "The filing goes to the panel clerk Monday," she said. "Monday," he confirmed. They walked in opposite directions. She went back to the records office to collect her copies. He went wherever he went, and on the other side of the street, she knew without looking at least 2 pairs of eyes, followed her the whole way. Let them watch, she thought. She had work to do. What she did not expect was Maribel. Not the argument she had expected the argument. What she had not expected was where the argument went. It happened that evening in the kitchen, which was where all the Lawson family's real conversations happened, because the kitchen was the room that Evelyn controlled, and everyone else had to come into it on her terms, whether they realized that or not. Maribel came in and sat down across the table, with the posture of someone who has arranged their feelings into a manageable order before arriving, which for Maribel was unusual enough to be notable. "I want to understand something," Maribel said. Evelyn was working on the week's account entries. She didn't stop. "Ask." "What is this with Whitmore?" "I told you, a business arrangement, grazing rights on the eastern pasture." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Evelyn set down her pen, looked at her sister. Maribel was beautiful and had always been beautiful, and Evelyn had spent long enough looking at her sister's face to read it past the beauty. Underneath the performance of composure, Maribel looked not angry, something closer to frightened. "He stood up in front of the whole town," Maribel said, "and he said your name. He credited the work I did. That's appropriate. He didn't mention father. He didn't mention the family. He said Evelyn Lawson like you were a person who existed separately from us. I am a person who exists separately from you." Maribel flinched. Something in Evelyn softened slightly. Not enough to take it back, but enough. "I'm not trying to separate myself from the family," she said more quietly. "I'm trying to make the family's actual situation clearer. That's not the same thing." "He looks at you," Maribel said. She said it simply like a fact she had observed and was still working out how to carry. "Not at me. He doesn't look at me the way he looks at you." Evelyn was quiet. "Does that bother you?" she asked carefully. Maribel was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she said at last. I've spent a long time being the one people look at. I don't know what it means when the one person who matters in a situation doesn't." "Maribel." Evelyn leaned forward just slightly. "He's not looking at me the way you're thinking." "Isn't he?" The kitchen held the silence between them. "Maybe he is," Evelyn said quietly. "I don't know what it is. I know it's not anything I did to hurt you. I didn't arrange this. I just did the work, the same as always." Maribel looked at this table. Her jaw was tight and her hands were folded, and something behind her eyes was working through something that Evelyn suspected had been building for longer than this week. "The work," Maribel said. She said it almost to herself. "You've always just done the work." "Yes. And I've always just—" She stopped. "Been the face of it," Evelyn said, not cruelly. "That's what the family needed. You did what the family needed." "So did you." "Yes?" A pause. "The difference is, the family knew they needed you. They just didn't quite notice they needed me too." Another silence. This one felt different. Less like opposition. More like two people standing in the same room and finally looking at the same thing. Maribel stood up. She smoothed her dress, the automatic gesture of someone putting their composure back where they keep it. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not upset," she said. "I know, but I'm also not going to make it uglier than it needs to be." She paused at the kitchen doorway. "You should know that Father talked to the Beaumont family today." Evelyn went still. "What do you mean?" "He had a conversation with Thomas Beaumont about the Halcott corridor, about the deed discrepancy." Maribel looked at her. Thomas Beaumont did not take it calmly. The account book sat open on the table between them. The numbers in it were real numbers, reliable numbers, numbers she could trust. But there were things happening outside the account book now, moving faster than she had calculated. And the Beaumonts were a name that had weight in this county. Old weight, the kind that had relationships attached to it and favors owed, and the particular political gravity of families who had been in a place long enough to be woven into its foundations. "What did Father say to him exactly?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know exactly." Maribel met her eyes. But Thomas Beaumont left the conversation looking like a man who had been told something he very much did not want to know. The kitchen was quiet. Evelyn picked up her pen, looked at the account entries, looked past them. What had seemed like a clean, careful, straightforward piece of documentary work was now in the middle of something larger than deed records and survey boundaries. And whatever the Beaumonts decided to do with what they now knew, or what they thought they knew, or what Gerald Lawson had decided to tell them, for reasons she had not yet figured out, that decision was going to shape what happened next. She closed the account book. She was going to need to talk to Caleb in the morning. She was going to need to understand exactly how much her father had just changed the landscape of something she had built carefully and precisely and on honest ground. And if Gerald Lawson had just handed the Beaumonts a reason to challenge the filing before it reached the arbitration panel. She pressed her hands flat on the table. One thing at a time. She had gotten through 8 years of this family, one thing at a time. She was not going to stop now. She was at the Pendleton by 7:30, a full 90 minutes before she'd told Caleb she would come. The clerk at the front desk gave her the look that she was getting used to, not hostile exactly, more like the particular careful neutrality of someone who has opinions they've decided it's not worth the trouble to express. She had been getting that look a lot this week. She had decided it was preferable to the whispers. Caleb answered the door on her second knock, already dressed, already awake, with the quality of alertness that told her he had not been sleeping well either. He took one look at her face and stepped back to let her in. "Your father talked to the Beaumonts," she said. She didn't sit down. "I know," Caleb said. "Thomas Beaumont sent a letter to the arbitration clerk last night. I got a copy this morning." She stared at him. "This morning? Early?" He picked up a folded paper from the table and held it out to her. She read it standing. It was 3 paragraphs. The language was formal and measured, and underneath the formality, it was a direct challenge to the admissibility of the documentary research she had compiled on the basis that the researcher had a potential conflict of interest given the Lawson family property's proximity to the corridor in question. Her name was in the second paragraph. Evelyn Lawson, an interested party. She read it twice. Then she set it back on the table. "My father told them about the Eastern pasture arrangement," she said. "That's what it looks like. He told them I had a financial stake in the corridor ruling." She said it flatly, working through it. "So that anything I documented could be challenged as self-serving." "Yes. He didn't do it to hurt me." She said this not to defend Gerald, but because it was true, and because precision mattered when she was thinking through a problem. He did it because Beaumont pushed him, and he gave them something to push back with rather than nothing. Probably. Which makes it worse in some ways. She moved to the chair across from the table and sat down finally, because standing was taking energy she needed for thinking. If he'd done it deliberately, I could be angry at him. Instead, I have to be angry at the situation. Caleb sat across from her. He folded his hands on the table, not the performative folding of someone making themselves look smaller, but the practical posture of someone settling into work. "Here's what I need you to understand," he said. the conflict of interest challenge is technically arguable. It won't win. The Eastern pasture arrangement wasn't in place when you did the original research, and we can document that timeline clearly. But it gives the Beaumonts something to file, and filing something creates delay, and delay gives them time to find other angles. How much delay? The panel clerk will have to acknowledge the challenge. Hearing scheduled probably 3 weeks out. 3 weeks. She calculated this against the filing timeline, against the grazing season, against the Beaumont's ability to use those 3 weeks to pressure other parties. Thomas Beaumont is going to use that time to talk to people, she said. He already is. Who? The mayor, the county recorder, 2 of the 3 arbitration panel members. Caleb's voice was even. He's not filing the challenge because he thinks it will win in the hearing. He's filing it because the filing itself is a message. He wants this town to understand that there's a cost to going against his family's interests. Evelyn looked at her hands, the work scars on her knuckles, 8 years of them. He's going after the arrangement, she said, the grazing arrangement between our properties. He's going after your credibility, Caleb said. If he can make the town believe that everything you did was self-serving rather than accurate, then the document work becomes questionable regardless of whether the documents are right, which they are. But that stops mattering if the panel loses confidence in the researcher. She was quiet. They won't have trouble making that case, she said. Half this town already thinks I'm either foolish or conniving for being involved in this at all. They'll believe self-serving faster than they'll believe competent. Some of them will. Most of them. She looked up. You know that. He held her gaze. Yes, I know that. So what do we do? He was quiet for a moment. Then, we don't defend the challenge. We answer it. What's the difference? Defending means we respond to Beaumont's framing. Answering means we put our own case in front of the panel directly, completely, and before the 3 weeks are up. He leaned forward. I want to call an open meeting, not through the mayor's office, outside it. Community meeting at the church hall. We present the documents, all of them. Not just the corridor research, the full picture of what the 1859 boundary discrepancy means for every landowner in this area. Not just the Lawson property. Everyone. Evelyn thought about this. If everyone understands the discrepancy, she said slowly, then the Beaumont's claim stops being a dispute between 2 families. It becomes a public record question that affects the whole county. Exactly. Beaumont will try to stop the meeting. He can't stop a community meeting on church grounds. He can make it uncomfortable. He can make sure his allies don't attend, but he can't legally prevent it. Caleb paused. He'll try other things. Such as, he'll go after your father. Gerald has debts, I don't know the specifics, but men like Thomas Beaumont always know the debts. He'll use whatever leverage he has to make Gerald withdraw the operational arrangement, which would remove your formal standing. Evelyn closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Her father, who had last night for the first time in 8 years looked at the real account books, who had also in the same week already given the Beaumonts the information they needed to file this challenge. Gerald Lawson under pressure was not the same as Gerald Lawson having a quiet moment of recognition at the kitchen table. I need to talk to my father before Beaumont does, she said. You have today, maybe tomorrow morning. She stood up. I'll come back this afternoon with his answer. Caleb stood as well. Evelyn. She looked at him. Whatever your father decides, he said, the document work was real. That doesn't change. I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the panel or the arrangement or anything else, the work was real and it was right. No one can unmake that. She looked at him for a moment. His face was exactly what it always was, direct and steady, and asking nothing of her that she hadn't already agreed to. Thank you, she said. She meant it with the precision she gave to everything, not as a formality, as a fact. Then she left to go find her father. Gerald was at the feedlot when she found him, which meant he had left the house early, which meant he knew she was coming and was trying to look occupied rather than evasive. She had known him long enough to read the difference. She stopped beside him, waited while he finished a conversation with the supply clerk about nothing important, waited while he turned and saw her face, and made the small adjustment that men make when they know the conversation is going to be harder than they want it to be. "I heard from Whitmore this morning," she said. "I imagine you did. You told Thomas Beaumont about the Eastern pasture arrangement." Gerald looked at his hat brim. "Beaumont came to me. He was not gentle about it. He wanted to know exactly what your involvement with Whitmore's case was, and whether the family had a stake in the corridor ruling." A pause. "I didn't lie to him." "No. You told him the truth in a way that gave him a weapon." "Evelyn." "Father, do you understand what the Beaumonts are doing?" She kept her voice low and level. The men at the far end of the lot were not close enough to hear. "They're not trying to win the arbitration on the merits. They know they can't. The documents are right, and they know the documents are right. They're trying to discredit the research by discrediting me. And now they have the Eastern pasture arrangement to point at as proof that I had a personal interest in the outcome." Gerald was quiet. "Beaumont said—" He stopped, started again. "He said if the arrangement held, it would affect the family's relationship with his operation. His family buys grain through a supplier that we use. He implied, he threatened to cut off your supplier relationship," Evelyn said. Gerald didn't deny it. "He threatened the family's business to make you give him information about me," she said. "And it worked." Gerald looked old standing there. Not old in the way that men look old when they're tired. Old in the way that men look when they see a version of themselves they didn't intend to become. "I'm sorry," he said. It came out quiet and without flourish, which made it more real than most of the things Gerald Lawson said. She looked at her father, at the man who had spent 15 years borrowing against potential he never built, who had let his daughter carry the operation in silence, who had given Thomas Beaumont a weapon because he was frightened and did not know how else to protect himself. "The Beaumonts are going to come back," she said. "Whatever they threatened you with, once they'll use again. I need to know if you're going to hold." He looked at her. "Hold how?" "The operational arrangement, the Eastern pasture agreement, your acknowledgement that I run the practical side of this property." She held his gaze. "If you withdraw that formally or informally, if you tell anyone that I was acting without your authorization, if you give Beaumont anything else, then everything falls apart. Not just the arrangement, everything I've built. You understand that?" Gerald was quiet for a long time. Around them, the feedlot went about its Tuesday business. Someone unloaded a wagon. A horse protested something. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning in a town that did not yet know how much was shifting underneath its ordinary surface. "What do you need me to do?" Gerald asked. She told him. The community meeting was Caleb's idea, but the execution of it was Evelyn's. She spent that afternoon at the church talking to Reverend Moore, not his wife. The Reverend himself, a thin and careful man who believed that his function was to provide the community with space for difficult things, and who had, in Evelyn's assessment, been watching the situation with more attention than he let on. "I need the hall Thursday evening," she said. Reverend Moore folded his hands. "The Beaumont family has a long relationship with this church." "I know. Thomas Beaumont donated the east window 3 years ago." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Reverend, the meeting is about county land records that affect every property holder in this parish. Deed discrepancies that have existed for 40 years. I'm not asking you to take a side. I'm asking you to provide the space for people to understand something that affects their own land." He was quiet. "If the Beaumont's claim holds, and the boundary discrepancy goes uncorrected," she said carefully, "then 7 other properties in this county are operating under the same flawed 1859 filing. That includes the McAllister Farm and the Hendricks grazing allotment and the church's own eastern boundary with the Miller property." Reverend Moore looked at her sharply. "The church boundary," he said, "the described line versus the actual survey line puts about 12 feet of the church's eastern property inside what the Miller deed currently claims." She met his eyes. It's a small discrepancy, but it's real, and it's in the same document error. A long silence. Thursday evening, Reverend Moore said. 7 o'clock. She thanked him and left. Caleb heard what she had done and was quiet for a moment. The church boundary, he said. Was real, she said. I wasn't manufacturing it. It's in the same survey discrepancy. I just led with it. That's not dishonest. No, it's just knowing which true thing to say first. She looked at him. You're not bothered by that. I'd be bothered if you'd said something false. He almost smiled. Knowing which true thing to say first is called judgment. She looked away before the expression on her face said something she hadn't decided to say yet. Thomas Beaumont found out about the meeting by Wednesday morning, which was faster than she'd hoped, but not faster than she'd planned for. He came to the records office while she was there pulling additional supporting documents for Thursday's presentation. He did not come alone. He brought his eldest son Harrison and the county recorder Aldous Webb, who had the uncomfortable posture of a man being used as a prop. Thomas Beaumont was 61 years old. He had the kind of face that had probably been handsome once and had since arranged itself into the configuration of a man who was accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. He looked at Evelyn the way powerful men look at people they've decided are obstacles rather than people. Miss Lawson, he said. Mr. Beaumont. She kept her hands on the documents in front of her. She did not stand. I understand you're planning a public presentation Thursday evening. Community meeting, she said. About the county deed records, open to everyone. Open to everyone, he repeated. Including people who may not fully understand what they're looking at. That's the point, she said. The documents haven't been hard to understand. They just haven't been read. Beaumont's jaw tightened by a small controlled amount. I want you to understand something, Miss Lawson. The corridor question has implications that go well beyond a survey line. There are arrangements in place. Business arrangements, relationships between families in this county that have held for 20 years that would be disrupted by an arbitration ruling based on your interpretation of these records. My interpretation matches the original survey, she said. It's not an interpretation, it's a reading. It's a reading that serves your interests. It's a reading that serves the documents. She looked up at him. If the documents serve my interests, that's the document's business, not mine. Harrison Beaumont made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Thomas Beaumont did not look at his son. Your father, Beaumont said, is a man who understands how relationships in this county work. My father is a man who reads the account books now, Evelyn said. That's a recent development, but it's a real one. Beaumont looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze without difficulty. She had been looking at larger problems than Thomas Beaumont's displeasure for 8 years. His stare did not have the same weight he thought it did. The conflict of interest challenge stands, he said. That's your right. We'll address it at the panel hearing. She looked back at her documents. Is there something else? He left. Harrison followed. Aldous Webb gave her the desperate look of a man who wishes he'd had a reason not to come, and then followed them out. Evelyn sat for a moment after the door closed. Her hands were steady. She checked. Yes, steady. She went back to work. Thursday evening came fast and came hard. The church hall was full in a way it had not been since the flood levy meeting 2 years ago. Farmers she had never personally spoken to, women from the outlying properties, 3 men from the county seat who had made the ride specifically for this. And in the back row, with the careful positioning of people who wanted to be seen attending without being seen endorsing 4 of the Beaumont family's business associates. Caleb stood to the side. He had been clear that this was her presentation, and he was not going to be the one at the front of the room. She had argued with him about it for approximately 4 minutes before she understood that he was right. If he stood at the front, this became about a wealthy man from Denver fighting a land dispute. If she stood at the front, this was something the town had to reckon with on its own terms. She stood at the front of the room. She had the documents arranged on the table. The original 1847 survey. The 1859 partition, filing with the boundary error marked. The 1874 derivative claim. A hand-drawn comparison of the described line versus the actual survey line done by a surveyor she had hired for 2 days' work at her own expense. She looked at the room. "I'm not here to make an argument," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I'm here to show you some documents that have been in the county records office for 40 years and explain what they say. You can decide what to do with that." She walked them through it, slowly at first, watching the faces in the room to calibrate how fast she could go. Some people understood immediately, the farmers who dealt with boundary questions regularly, who knew what a survey line was and what a boundary description was, and what it meant when the two didn't match. Some people needed more time. She gave them the time. 12 minutes in, she showed the comparison drawing. The room leaned forward almost as one. "The described line," she said, tracing it with her finger, "is here. The actual survey line is here. That gap 40 feet along a 2.5-mile corridor represents 6 acres currently recorded under the wrong deed." A farmer in the third row named Cord McAllister, she knew him slightly, knew his operation better than she knew him personally, raised his hand. "Miss Lawson, you said this same error affects the McAllister allotment." "Yes, sir. Your northern boundary runs from the same 1859 filing. The described line puts approximately 1 acre of your pasture inside the Beaumont claim." Cord McAllister looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at the back row where the Beaumont associates were sitting. Then he looked back at her. "How long has this been wrong?" he asked. "Since 1859, she said. 67 years. The room had a particular quality of sound, now. Not silence and not noise, but something between them. The sound of a lot of people absorbing a lot of information at the same time and beginning to draw their own conclusions. This was the moment she had planned for. This was where the meeting either became something real or became something that people walked away from unchanged. She looked at the room. "I want to be clear about something," she said, and she said it loudly enough that the back row heard it too. "This meeting is not a claim against anyone. These documents are public record. The survey discrepancy existed before any of the current owners held their deeds. What the county decides to do with this information is the county's business. I'm just making sure the county knows what's in its own records." Another hand. A woman she didn't recognize from the far side of the hall. "Who paid for the surveyor?" the woman asked. "The one who did the comparison drawing." "I did," Evelyn said. "Out of my own pocket." "Why?" She thought about answering. Thought about what the real answer was, and whether she was willing to say it in front of this many people. "Because the documents were right," she said, "and I needed to be sure. And because if I was going to stand in front of this town and say something, I wanted to have already done the work to know I was right before I said it." The woman nodded slowly. Cord McAllister said to no one in particular, "That's a decent answer." The room's temperature changed. Not dramatically, not a wave of warmth, not a turning of tides in any dramatic sense. But something shifted. Something in the quality of the attention being paid to her changed from the cautious watching of a crowd waiting to judge into something more, like the focused attention of people who are actually listening. She had been talking to Red Hollow her whole life. For the first time, Red Hollow was actually listening. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. When it ended, 12 people stayed to ask questions. Not hostile questions, working questions. The kind of questions that practical people ask when they're trying to understand something that affects them. Caleb stayed in the corner and said nothing and let her answer all of it. When the last person had left and they were alone in the hall, he looked at her across the empty room. "You knew about McAllister's allotment," he said. "Yes. You led with the church boundary to get the Reverend to give you the space. Then you let McAllister figure out his own stake on his own." "Yes. That was good strategy." "It was the truth," she said. "I just organized the truth in a useful order." He looked at her steadily. "Evelyn, you ran that room." She picked up her documents, organized them into the case she'd brought. Didn't let herself react to what he'd said, because reacting to it would mean feeling it, and feeling it would mean acknowledging that something had changed tonight that she hadn't let herself acknowledge yet. "Beaumont's people in the back row," she said. "They'll report back tonight." "Yes." "He's going to escalate." "Probably tomorrow," Caleb said. "He's not a patient man." She put on her coat. The hall was empty now, and the night outside was quiet, and she was more tired than she had been in a long time, with a tiredness that had satisfaction running through the center of it. "Then we should both sleep," she said, "because tomorrow is going to be a fight." Caleb walked with her to the door. He didn't offer to escort her home. He understood she thought that she had been getting herself home alone for 8 years and did not need to be accompanied. What he did was hold the door. She stepped out into the night. "Evelyn," he said. She turned. He was standing in the doorway. The light from inside the hall was behind him, and she could not quite read his expression. "Whatever tomorrow brings," he said. "Tonight you stood in that room and told the truth in front of the whole town. Whatever the outcome, no one can take that back." She looked at him. "No," she said. "They can't." She walked home alone through the quiet streets of Red Hollow, and she was still thinking about that when she reached the door of the Lawson house and found sitting on the front step in the dark her sister Maribel, who had been at the meeting, who had sat in the middle rows where Evelyn had not seen her, who now looked up with an expression that Evelyn had never seen on her sister's face before. Not anger, not competition, not the careful, beautiful mask she wore in public. Something rawer than any of that. "I didn't know," Maribel said. "About McAllister's land, the church boundary, all of it." She shook her head slightly. "I didn't know you knew all of that." Evelyn looked at her sister. "I know," she said gently. "That's the point, isn't it?" Maribel said. Not a question. "Yes," Evelyn said. "That's exactly the point." She sat down beside her sister on the step. They sat in the dark together for a while, not talking, two women who had grown up in the same house and lived in completely different versions of it. And somewhere in the quiet between them, something old and long calcified began very slowly to soften. Tomorrow Beaumont would escalate. Tomorrow the fight would get harder. But tonight, for the first time in as long as she could remember, Evelyn Lawson was not sitting alone. Thomas Beaumont moved fast, and he moved before breakfast. Evelyn found out about it, the way she found out about most things in Red Hollow, through the side channels, the second-hand reports, the words that arrived before the facts they described. This time, it was the grain supplier's boy who came to the Lawson stable at 7 in the morning with a delivery and mentioned in the casual way of someone repeating something he didn't fully understand that Mr. Beaumont had been at the county recorder's office when it opened and had filed something with Aldous Webb, and that Webb had looked like a man who had swallowed something uncomfortable. Evelyn thanked the boy, finished stabling the delivery, and went inside to tell her father. Gerald was at the kitchen table with his coffee. He looked up when she came in. He had the expression of a man who had slept badly and knew why. "Beaumont filed something this morning at the recorder's office," she said. Gerald set down his cup. "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet. I am going to find out." She picked up her coat. "I need you to stay here and not talk to anyone until I get back." "Can you do that?" "Evelyn." "Father, can you do that?" He looked at her, nodded once. She left. Caleb was already at the recorder's office when she arrived. He was standing outside with a single folded document in his hand and the expression of a man who has read something and is deciding exactly how to present it. He held it out to her without preamble. She read it. It was a formal objection to the arbitration filing, but that was the surface of it. Underneath, embedded in the legal language, with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, was something far more damaging. Beaumont had filed a claim that the Lawson property's eastern boundary had itself been improperly recorded, that there was a pre-existing encroachment on the Lawson land that predated the eastern pasture arrangement with Caleb by 3 years. If the claim held, it meant the Lawson property was operating on disputed ground, which meant the operational arrangement Evelyn had negotiated had been entered under false pretenses, which meant her standing as a consultant on the corridor research was not just conflicted, but potentially fraudulent. She read it twice, then once more. "He's not attacking the documents," she said. "No," Caleb said. "He's attacking the ground you're standing on." The Eastern Boundary Claim. She looked up. "Is it real?" "I don't know yet. I sent a wire to my surveyor in Denver this morning. He can be here in 4 days. A pause. "If Beaumont manufactured this claim, we can prove it. But 4 days is 4 days, and the panel hearing on the Conflict of Interest challenge is in 2 weeks. He doesn't need it to be real," she said. She was working through it as she spoke the same way she worked through account discrepancies. Follow the number to its source. Don't assume the error is where it appears to be. He just needs it to be unresolved when the panel convenes. An unresolved boundary dispute on the Lawson property makes the Conflict of Interest challenge look more credible, not less. The panel members will see a mess, and they'll want to step back from it. "Yes, he's buying confusion," she said. "Not winning, just muddying the water." Caleb looked at her steadily. "Can you find out if there's any truth to the Eastern Boundary Claim before my surveyor arrives?" She thought about this. The Lawson property's Eastern Boundary documentation was not in the county records office. It was in a box in the back of the Lawson house's storage room, where her father kept the property papers in a state of organization that was charitable to call incomplete. "I'll need to go through the property records," she said. "Today. I'll come with you." She hesitated. "Evelyn." His voice was quiet but direct. "This is my case too. Let me help." She thought about what it meant to let someone into the back room of the house where the boxes were disorganized, and the papers were a testament to 15 years of Gerald Lawson's approach to documentation. She thought about what it meant to let someone see the actual state of things, rather than the face she had been maintaining. Then she thought about Thomas Beaumont at the recorder's office at First Light, filing papers designed to dismantle the only solid thing she had built in 8 years. "Come on," she said. "Come." Gerald was still at the kitchen table when they came in. He looked at Caleb with the complicated expression of a man who is not sure if the person entering his house is an ally or an accountability he hasn't prepared for. "We need the property papers," Evelyn said. "The Eastern Boundary documentation specifically. Where are the deed files?" "Storage room," Gerald said. He did not ask why. He looked at Caleb and then looked at his coffee and said, "I'll show you." The storage room was what she'd expected. Boxes stacked without consistent logic, paper folders mixed with loose sheets. The accumulated disorder of a man who kept things because getting rid of them felt like a decision. And filing them properly required a system he'd never established. Gerald pointed at 2 boxes in the far corner. "Property papers should be in those." Evelyn opened the first box. Caleb opened the second. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, while Gerald stood in the doorway, and the silence had a quality to it not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted like the silence in a room where something important is being decided and everyone present knows it. Caleb found it. "Evelyn," he said. She moved to his side. He had a folder open old paper, the particular brown-edged yellowing of documents from the 1860s. The Lawson Eastern Boundary, original deed, recorded 1871, and beneath it, a second document she had never seen before. A letter, dated 1873, from the county recorder's office at the time. Addressed to the previous owner of the Lawson property, Evelyn's grandfather, James Lawson, informing him of a boundary survey conducted by the county that had identified a discrepancy of approximately 8 feet on the eastern edge of the property, and requesting that he respond within 60 days to confirm or contest the finding. There was no response letter in the box. Evelyn stared at the document. "He never responded," she said. "Which means the county's finding stands uncontested," Caleb said. His voice was careful. "Which means there is technically a recorded discrepancy on the eastern boundary. Beaumont didn't manufacture it. He found it." Gerald came forward from the doorway. He looked at the letter. He had gone slightly pale. "I didn't know about this," he said. Grandfather never told anyone, Evelyn said. She was still reading the letter, her mind running through the implications at the speed of someone who had spent 8 years doing exactly this kind of calculation under pressure. It's been sitting here for 50 years. Nobody ever pulled it because nobody ever needed to. Beaumont knew, Caleb said. Someone told him. She looked up. Or he had his own people do a record search. When he found out about the community meeting, he ran a title search on every connected property. She thought about when that would have been. He's been looking for this since Thursday morning at the latest. Gerald sat down on a box. He was quiet in the way of a man trying to figure out which mistake he is currently paying for and which mistakes are still incoming. Evelyn looked at the letter again. 8 feet. Not 6 acres like the corridor discrepancy. 8 feet of boundary line uncontested since 1873 that technically left the eastern edge of the Lawson property in a recorded dispute with the adjacent parcel. She thought about who owned the adjacent parcel. She went back to the deed folder, found the property map, traced the eastern boundary line with her finger. The adjacent parcel to the east of the Lawson property was not Beaumont land. It was the McAllister farm. She looked at this for a long moment. Then she looked at Caleb. Cord McAllister, she said. He understood immediately. He was at the meeting. He heard everything. He knows the Beaumonts have been sitting on his northern allotment for 67 years under the wrong deed. She tapped the property map. And if the Lawson eastern boundary dispute is actually a dispute with McAllister, not with Beaumont, then Beaumont has no standing to file it. Caleb leaned over the map, studied it. He filed a third-party objection on the basis that the disputed boundary affects his family's interests, he said slowly. If the disputed boundary is between Lawson and McAllister is not part of the objection, then the filing is based on a false premise, Evelyn said. Beaumont presented himself as an interested party. He's not in this specific boundary question. Silence. Gerald looked between them. What does that mean? It means, Evelyn said, that I need to go see Cord McAllister today. Cord McAllister's farm was 6 miles from town, and she drove the wagon herself because she wanted to use the time to think. She went through every angle. The 1873 letter, the boundary discrepancy, the 8 feet, Beaumont's filing, the false premise of his standing, the panel hearing in 2 weeks, the community meeting that had already shifted something not enough, but something in how the town was thinking about this. What she needed from McAllister was simple, and also not simple at all. She needed him to understand that the 8-foot boundary discrepancy had been weaponized not against her, but against him, because the implication of Beaumont's filing was that the Lawson property was encroaching on someone's land, and if that someone was McAllister, then McAllister should be the one responding, not Beaumont. And she needed McAllister to be willing to say so. She found him in his workyard. He was a plain-spoken man in his 50s with the quality of stillness that comes from a lifetime of making decisions about land and weather and animals, all things that do not negotiate and do not care about your feelings. He watched her drive in, waited for her to get down from the wagon, did not say anything until she was standing in front of him. I heard Beaumont filed something, he said, this morning, against the arbitration case. Figured he would. He crossed his arms, not hostile thinking. What does he say? She told him, clearly and completely including the 1873 letter, including the 8-foot discrepancy, including the fact that the disputed land was adjacent to his property, not Beaumont's. McAllister listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. So Beaumont filed an objection on land that's got nothing to do with him, he said, on the basis that the corridor ruling affects his interests, she said. The eastern boundary claim was meant to muddy my standing. But if the boundary question is yours to raise or not raise, then his filing is built on air, McAllister said. Yes. He looked at the ground, looked at the horizon. the particular long-range look of a farmer calculating something that has too many variables for a quick answer. "That 8-foot strip," he said. "Has your family been using it?" "No," she said. "I checked. It falls inside the fence line we've maintained for 20 years. We've never grazed it, never worked it. It's essentially a drainage strip between the properties." McAllister nodded slowly. "So you're asking me to file a statement that I have no active dispute with the Lawson property over that boundary," he said. "I'm asking you to decide whether you have an active dispute," she said. "That's your decision. I'm not asking you to say anything that isn't true." Another silence. "Your family's never given me trouble," he said finally. "And those Beaumont boys have been sitting on my northern allotment for 67 years on a bad deed." He met her eyes. "You think the corridor ruling is going to fix that?" "The corridor ruling establishes the principle that the 1859 boundary descriptions are unreliable," she said. "Once that principle is in the record, you have standing to challenge your northern allotment separately. You'd need a surveyor and probably an attorney, but the legal foundation would be there." McAllister looked at her for a long moment. "Your father know you're out here making this argument?" he asked. "My father knows I'm handling this." Something shifted in McAllister's expression. Not quite a smile. The recognition that passed between practical people when they see each other clearly. "I'll file the statement by end of day," he said. "No active dispute. Never been one." Evelyn breathed. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just make sure the ruling holds." She was back in town by 3 in the afternoon. She went directly to Caleb. He listened to everything. When she finished, he looked at her with the expression that was becoming familiar to her, the one that was not quite admiration, and not quite something else somewhere between the two. Something she had stopped trying to name. "Beaumont's filing falls apart when McAllister's statement hits the recorder's office," he said. "Yes, Webb will have to acknowledge that the third-party standing claim is unsupported." She sat down. She was tired in a deep and specific way. "He'll file something else." "Probably. But he'll be slower this time. And he'll know that whatever he files, we're going to check every premise." She looked at her hands. "He was counting on us being reactive. If we keep being faster than he expects, he runs out of angles before the panel hearing." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You drove 6 miles to McAllister's farm on your own," he said. "Yes." "And turned a boundary dispute that could have ended everything into the thing that breaks Beaumont's filing." "McAllister did that. I just explained the situation." "Evelyn." He leaned forward. "Stop diminishing what you did." She looked up. "You've been doing that your whole life," he said. "Taking the thing you did and calling it something smaller. I just explained the situation. I just read the documents. I just kept the books. You saved this case this afternoon. Say that." The room was quiet. She felt something in her chest, not the small, carefully rationed piece of hope from before. Something bigger. Something she had not let herself feel in so long that she had almost forgotten it was possible. "I saved the case," she said. She said it plainly, not triumphantly, just accurately. "Yes," he said. "You did." Beaumont's next move came the following morning, and it was not what she expected. He went to Maribel. She found out from Maribel herself, who came to find her at the stable before the morning was properly started, with an expression that had moved past complicated into something that was just determined. "He came to the house last night," Maribel said. "After you and Father were asleep, he asked for me specifically." Evelyn set down what she was doing. "What did he say?" "He said that the situation had gotten out of hand and that there was a way to resolve it that would benefit the family." Maribel's voice was very controlled. "He said if Father would sign an affidavit withdrawing support for the operational arrangement, stating that you'd entered the grazing agreement without proper family authorization, then he would drop the boundary claim and facilitate a different grazing arrangement directly with the Lawson family. A better one, he said. More money." Evelyn was quiet. "He went to you," she said, "because he thought, Because he thought I would want to, Maribel said. Because he thought I'd been watching Whitmore choose you over me and I'd be willing to trade you for a better deal. She met her sister's eyes. That's what he thought of me. A pause. What did you tell him? Evelyn asked. Maribel's jaw was tight. I told him to get off our property. Something moved through Evelyn that was too large and too sudden to name. She stood very still and let it move through her and did not try to manage it or contain it or diminish it. Maribel, she said. Don't, Maribel said. Her voice had something in it that was close to breaking but hadn't broken. Don't make it sentimental. I did what was right. That's all. That's not all, Evelyn said. That's Maribel. That's everything. Her sister looked away, blinked, looked back. He's going to try again, Maribel said. He won't stop. He'll find another angle. I know. So what do we do? Evelyn thought about the account books, the documents, McAllister's statement, the community meeting, the panel hearing in less than 2 weeks, the 12 people who had stayed after to ask real questions. Cord McAllister's plain-spoken, I'll file by end of day. Reverend Moore's Thursday evening, 7 o'clock. She thought about what it meant that her sister was standing in the stable at dawn asking, what do we do, instead of what are you going to do? We, she thought. That was new. We keep going, she said. That's what we do. The next 10 days were the hardest of it. Beaumont filed 2 more procedural challenges. Both were addressed, one by Caleb's Denver surveyor, who arrived on schedule and documented the eastern boundary question, cleanly confirming McAllister's statement and eliminating the false premise of Beaumont's third-party standing. The second was a challenge to the admissibility of the original 1847 survey on the basis that the document had not been properly certified by the current county recorder. Aldous Webb, caught between the Beaumonts and the growing weight of public attention on this case, certified the document within 48 hours with the reluctant speed of a man who has realized which way the wind is blowing. Through all of it, Evelyn worked. She cross-referenced. She documented. She prepared the presentation for the panel hearing with the same precision she had brought to the original research, because she understood now, more clearly than she had at the beginning, that the way to win this was not to outmaneuver Beaumont in his own register. It was to be so thoroughly correct, so completely documented, so clearly and demonstrably right, that maneuvering around her became impossible. You could not outflank mathematics. You could not threaten a survey line into being different than it was. She held on to that. Caleb held the strategic layer, the conversations with the panel members that were appropriate to have the communication with the clerk, the management of the Denver surveyor's formal report. He was good at that layer, precise and unhurried and impossible to rattle. They worked together in the evenings at the Pendleton, across the same table where they had gone through the original documents, and the rhythm of working with someone you trusted. Someone who did not require you to be anything other than exactly what you were, was something she had not had before, and was still learning how to carry, without being overwhelmed by the newness of it. On the 9th day, Caleb looked up from the papers they were reviewing, and said without particular preamble, "When this is over, I'm going back to Denver to manage the corridor acquisition." She went still. "When are you going back?" she asked. "After the panel ruling. 2 weeks, maybe 3. He was watching her carefully. "The corridor arrangement with your property, the grazing rights documentation, all of that is structured to run without my presence. You have everything you need to manage it from here." "I know," she said. "The Denver operation needs work," he continued. "I've been here longer than I planned." A pause. "It's not where I expected this month to go." She looked at the papers in front of her, organized them, did not look up. "Is it where you wanted it to go?" she asked. The question sat in the room between them. She had not planned to ask it. She had planned to be practical about this practical, the way she had been practical about everything, the way you learn to be practical when feeling things has never been particularly safe. "Yes," he said, "more than I knew how to plan for." She looked up. He was looking at her with the direct, unadorned honesty that was simply his nature, No performance, no management. Just the plain truth of what he meant, offered to her the way he offered everything straightforwardly and without demanding that she receive it any particular way. "Denver," she said. "Is a long way," he said. "Yes." "But not as long as some things," he said. She did not answer that. She did not have the words for it yet, but she held it the way you hold something real carefully with both hands, because you know that if you drop it, there may not be another chance. She went back to the papers. He went back to his, and between them, in the space that had been filled for 2 weeks with documents and legal filings, and the weight of a fight that had asked more of her than she'd known she had, something else had taken shape, something quieter than any of it, something that did not need to be resolved tonight. The panel hearing was 3 days away. She was not going to let herself feel it fully until after, but it was there, waiting, patient as she was. The morning of the panel hearing, Evelyn woke before the birds. She lay still for a moment in the dark and ran through everything: the documents, the timeline, the surveyor's report, McAllister's statement, the certified 1847 survey, the comparison drawing, every piece of the case in sequence, the way you check a harness before a long ride, not because you expect to find something wrong, but because checking is what you do when it matters. Everything was in order. She got up, fed the horses, did it the way she always did, methodically, without rushing, because the horses did not care about arbitration panels, and their needs did not pause for human urgency. The gray mare's leg was nearly healed. She ran her hand down it in the dark and felt the absence of heat, and said quietly, "There you go." Then she went inside and put on the best dress she owned. It was not the kind of dress Maribel would have chosen. It was clean and well-fitted and dark blue, and it said without saying anything that the person wearing it had come to work. She looked at herself once in the small mirror above the washstand, looked long enough to see what she needed to see. Then she picked up her document case and walked out the door. The arbitration panel convened at 9 o'clock in the county hall, a room that smelled like old wood and pipe smoke and the accumulated weight of decisions made about land and money, and who got to claim what in a county that had been arguing about its own boundaries since before most of its current residents were born. 3 panel members sat at the front table. The clerk, Aldous Webb, sat to the side, with the posture of a man who had decided his only remaining goal was to survive the day professionally intact. The gallery held more people than Evelyn had expected. The 12 from the community meeting were there, and McAllister was there, and Reverend Moore was there, and a row of faces she recognized as landowners from the outer parcels who had not been at the meeting, but had clearly heard about it. Thomas Beaumont was at the respondents' table, with 2 men she did not recognize, attorneys, by their dress and their posture. Harrison Beaumont sat behind his father with his arms crossed. Caleb was at the petitioner's table. He stood when she entered, pulled out the chair beside him. She sat down, opened the document case, laid out the papers in the order she would need them. "How are you?" Caleb asked quietly. "Ready," she said. He nodded. That was sufficient. The lead panel member, a heavy-set man named Aldrich, who had been doing this for 20 years, called the room to order with a single knock of his hand on the table. He had the practiced authority of a man who had no patience for theater and a considerable amount of patience for facts. "We are here on the matter of the Halcott Corridor Boundary Arbitration Petition filed by Caleb Whitmore on behalf of the Whitmore Ranch operation, with documentary research submitted by Evelyn Lawson." He looked at the papers in front of him. "We have received 3 procedural objections from the Beaumont family, all of which have been responded to in the record. I am going to address those objections first, before we hear the substantive case." He looked at Beaumont's table. "Counselor." Beaumont's lead attorney stood. He was smooth and prepared, and he made his arguments cleanly. The conflict of interest, the boundary dispute, the certification question. All 3 articulated professionally in the language of procedure rather than accusation. When he sat down, Aldrich looked at Evelyn. Not at Caleb. At Evelyn. "Miss Lawson, you're the researcher of record. Do you want to respond?" She stood. She addressed the conflict of interest claim first, laid out the timeline with precision, the dates of the original research, the date the Eastern pasture arrangement was proposed, the documented gap between the two that made the claim of self-interest procedurally unfounded. She did not argue it. She demonstrated it. Dates and documents in order without commentary. Then the boundary dispute. She explained the 1873 letter, the 8-foot discrepancy, the adjacent property holder McAllister's statement. She placed McAllister's signed statement on the clerk's table. She noted that the Beaumont filing had claimed third-party standing on the basis of interest in a boundary question that legally belonged to a different landowner entirely. "Mr. McAllister is present," she said. "If the panel wishes to hear from him directly regarding his position on the Lawson Eastern boundary, he is available." Aldrich looked at McAllister. "Mr. McAllister, do you have an active dispute with the Lawson property regarding the eastern boundary?" McAllister stood from the gallery. "No, sir. Never have. Thank you." Aldrich made a note. He did not look at Beaumont's table. "The certification question has been resolved in the record. The 1847 survey has been certified by the county recorder. That objection is dismissed." He set down his pen. "All 3 procedural objections are dismissed. We will proceed to the substantive case." Beaumont's attorney was on his feet. "Mr. Aldrich, with respect." "Sit down, counselor." Aldrich's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "The objections are dismissed. We are proceeding." The attorney sat. Evelyn sat. Under the table, her hands were completely still. The substantive presentation took 40 minutes. She had prepared for 2 hours, which meant she had distilled 2 hours of material into 40 minutes of what was essential, because Aldrich was a man who valued density over length, and she had understood that from the first time she'd seen him handle a meeting. She walked the panel through the documents in sequence. The 1847 survey. The 1859 partition filing. The error demonstrated clearly with the comparison drawing which she placed on the table where all 3 panel members could see it. The 1874 derivative claim. The mathematical calculation of the boundary differential. The surveyor's independent confirmation. She did not dramatize any of it. She did not need to. The documents did the work. She just made sure the panel could see exactly what the documents said and exactly what the implications were. When she finished, Aldrich looked at the comparison drawing for a long moment. 6 acres, he said. 6.2, according to the surveyor's calculation, she said. Currently recorded under the Beaumont deed. Under the 1874 derivative claim which inherited the 1859 boundary error, yes. Aldrich looked at the other 2 panel members. A silent exchange passed between them, the particular economy of communication between people who have worked together long enough to speak in glances. Then he looked at Beaumont's table. "Counselor, do you have a substantive response to the documentary evidence?" Beaumont's attorney stood again. He was good. Evelyn gave him that. He argued that the 1859 filing had been acted upon in good faith for 67 years, and that the principle of established usage should outweigh a technical survey discrepancy. He argued that the research methodology, while competent, reflected a single interpretation of ambiguous historical records. He argued that the disruption to established property arrangements would cause disproportionate harm to current holders. He did not argue that the documents were wrong. He couldn't. They weren't wrong. When he finished, Aldrich looked at Evelyn again. "Miss Lawson, anything to add?" She stood. "Established usage doesn't change what a survey line says," she said. "It doesn't move the creek bends that the 1847 survey used as markers. The markers are still there. The line is where it is. The 67 years of acting on the wrong description doesn't make the description right, it just means the error has been standing for 67 years. She paused. The panel has the original survey. The panel has the independent confirmation. The documents say what they say. She sat down. Aldrich nodded once. "The panel will deliberate," he said. "We will return with a ruling before end of day." The 3 hours of waiting were the hardest part. Not because she doubted the case, she didn't. The case was solid, and she knew it was solid the way you know when a fence is properly set, not from hope, but from having done the work correctly. What made the waiting hard was the particular exhaustion that comes after a long, sustained effort, when the effort finally stops requiring everything you have, and what's left in the silence is everything you've been too busy to feel. She sat on a bench outside the county hall with her document case across her knees and let herself feel it. Caleb sat beside her. He did not try to fill the silence. After a while, she said, "Whatever they decide, the documents are right." "Yes," he said. "Even if the panel finds a reason to rule narrowly. Even if Beaumont finds another angle after this. The documents say what they say, and I put them in the record, and they're there now." "They're there," he said. A pause. "I'm not going to fall apart if it goes wrong," she said. She meant it as a statement of fact. "I just want you to know that." "I know that," he said. "You're the least likely person to fall apart that I've ever met." She looked at him. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "The compliment is that it's one of the things I—" He stopped. "One of the things you what?" she asked. He looked at her directly, the way he always looked at things, without evasion, without performance. "One of the things I'm going to find it very hard to leave," he said. The bench was hard, and the day was bright, and the street in front of the county hall went about its ordinary business, and Evelyn Lawson sat in the middle of all of it, and looked at the man beside her, and felt something she had not let herself feel in so long that she had half convinced herself she was incapable of it. "Denver," she said. "Is a long way," he said, same as before. "You said that." "I meant it both times." She looked at her hands on the document case. Strong hands. Scarred hands. Hands that had done 8 years of work that no one had seen. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said quietly. "With this. Whatever this is. I don't have experience with—" "Neither do I," he said. "Not with this specific thing." She looked up. "You're a wealthy man. You've been everywhere. You've dealt with—" "I've dealt with land and money and legal disputes," he said. "That's not the same thing." A pause. "I know how to run an operation. I don't know what to do when someone changes the way you see what an operation is supposed to be for." She was quiet. "What did I change?" she asked. "You made it seem like the point was the work itself," he said. "Not the outcome, not the profit. The actual work, the doing of it right, the care of it, the honesty of it." He looked straight ahead. "I've been building things for 15 years, and I think I'd forgotten that was the reason." The street was quiet. The sun was past its peak. Somewhere inside the county hall, 3 men were deliberating over documents she had spent 2 weeks of her life preparing. And the outcome of that deliberation was going to shape the next several years of her family's position in this county. And she was sitting outside in the afternoon and having the most honest conversation she'd had in her adult life. "I'm not going to ask you to stay," she said. "That's not something I'm going to do. I know. But I'm also not going to pretend that it doesn't matter." She said it plainly. The way she said everything that was true and difficult. "It matters." He turned and looked at her. "It matters to me too," he said. "More than I know how to resolve in the next 3 hours." She almost smiled. Almost. "We could start with the ruling and go from there." "That's practical." "I'm a practical person." "You are," he said. "You're also—" He stopped again. "Also what?" "The most capable person I've met in 20 years of doing business," he said. "And I don't say that to be kind. I say it because it's accurate, and because I think you've spent a long time not hearing it, and that's a waste." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away, because looking at him directly, while she was feeling all of this, was more than she could manage, without losing the composure she was going to need when the panel came back. "After the ruling," she said. "After the ruling," he agreed. They sat in the afternoon and waited. The panel returned at 4:15. The gallery had reassembled. The Beaumont table was back in place. Thomas Beaumont with his jaw set and his hands folded and his expression arranged into the stillness of a man who has decided not to let himself look worried. Harrison sat behind him again. The two attorneys had the careful posture of men who have been paid regardless of outcome. Evelyn was at the petitioner's table, Caleb beside her. Her document case closed now, her hands flat on the table. Aldrich sat down, arranged his papers, looked at the room. The panel has reviewed all submitted documentation and heard argument from both parties, he said. We find as follows. The room was absolutely silent. The 1847 survey of the Halcott corridor establishes a boundary line that supersedes all subsequent derivative descriptions. The 1859 partition filing contains a material error in the eastern boundary description that has propagated into all subsequent deed filings built upon it, including the 1874 Beaumont claim to the corridor parcel. The correct boundary as established by the original survey and confirmed by independent survey conducted in October 1886 places 6.2 acres of the corridor currently recorded under the Beaumont deed within the boundary of the Whitmore corridor acquisition. Beaumont's hand tightened on the table. She saw it. The panel rules in favor of the petition, Aldrich continued. The Halcott corridor boundary shall be recorded in accordance with the 1847 survey line. The county recorder is directed to issue corrected deed descriptions for all affected parcels within 60 days. The Beaumont family retains their deed to the correctly bounded parcels. They do not retain claim to the 6.2 acres that fall outside that boundary. He looked up. The panel further notes for the record that the documentary research submitted in this matter was thorough, accurate, and of a quality that reflects well on the researcher. The conflict of interest objections were without merit. This case was decided on the basis of public documents that have been available in the county records for 40 years. The panel commends the effort that was required to read them. He set down his papers. We are adjourned. The room broke open, not into celebration, into the sound of a lot of people absorbing a significant decision at the same time, which is louder and less organized than celebration and more real. McAllister said something to the man beside him. Reverend Moore bowed his head briefly in the way of a man offering a private thanks. Webb was writing furiously, his pen moving across the clerk's record with the speed of someone who wants to be accurate and wants to be finished. Thomas Beaumont stood. He did not look at Evelyn. He looked at Aldrich, who was gathering his papers and not looking back. Then he looked at his attorneys, and something passed between them, a decision made quickly about how to carry this out of the room. He picked up his hat, walked to the door. Harrison followed. The attorneys followed Harrison. At the door, Thomas Beaumont stopped. He did not turn around. But he stopped, and the room noticed and went slightly quieter. Then he kept walking. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Caleb turned to her. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her with the direct, steady expression that she had come to understand was the most he showed of what he felt. And it was enough. It was more than enough. The documents were right, she said. The documents were right, he said. She looked at the table. At the closed document case. At her hands beside it. Then Cord McAllister was at her shoulder. His hand extended, and she shook it. Then the woman from the back of the community meeting. Then two men she didn't know by name who introduced themselves as the Perkins brothers from the North Parcels, who had been watching the corridor question for 3 years and had come today not knowing what to expect. She shook every hand. She answered every question that was asked of her. She did it without grandeur and without false modesty, just directly the way she did everything, because that was who she was, and because she had stopped apologizing for it. Sure. Her father was waiting at the house when she got home. He was standing in the yard, not sitting, which meant he had been too anxious to sit. He saw her face when she came through the gate, and his own face did something complicated that she did not have a word for relief and guilt, and something that was probably pride moving through him in quick succession. We won, he said. The panel ruled in our favor. She came through the gate. 6.2 acres. The corridor boundary stands as surveyed. Gerald closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were slightly wet at the corners, which for Gerald Lawson was the equivalent of a collapse. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I gave Beaumont. I know that made it harder." "It did," she said, "but we got through it." "We," he said. He said it the way McAllister had, hearing the word for what it meant. "Yes," she said. "We." He nodded. He did not try to say more. Some things Gerald Lawson understood could not be covered by words, and he had the grace for once to leave it uncovered. She went inside, changed out of the blue dress, put on her work clothes, and went to check the mare's leg one more time before dark. It was healed, completely. She ran her hand along it and felt nothing but sound tissue and the warmth of a healthy animal. "There," she said quietly. "There you go."
Japerte.
Maribel found her in the stable. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching Evelyn finish the evening check. Then she came in and leaned against the stall rail, the way she had not done since they were children, when the stable had been neutral territory between two sisters who were already becoming different people. "It's over," Maribel asked. "The ruling is done. Beaumont still has options he could appeal, but the record is set." Evelyn latched the stall. "He won't appeal. He's too careful about his reputation to put himself through another public hearing on the same losing case." Maribel was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" "The county redraws the deed descriptions. The grazing arrangement goes into effect. The operation runs." Evelyn picked up the water bucket. "Same as always, but with better paperwork. And Whitmore." A pause. "He goes back to Denver," Evelyn said. She said it the same way she had said the ruling plainly as a fact. Maribel looked at her. "Is that all?" Evelyn met her sister's eyes. "I don't know yet," she said. There are things that haven't been said, that I haven't let myself say." She set down the bucket. "I've spent a long time not saying things because saying them felt like spending something I couldn't afford to spend. And now I think maybe I've been calculating wrong." She looked at her hands. "I've been so careful about what things cost. I never thought about what not having them costs." Maribel was quiet for a moment. Then in a voice that was more honest than Evelyn had heard from her sister in years, "Tell him." Evelyn looked up. "Tell him whatever you haven't said," Maribel said. "I know I'm not the person you'd expect to say that, but I'm saying it." She paused. "You spent 8 years doing the right thing without asking for anything back. You can ask for this." Evelyn looked at her sister, at the woman who had stood on the front step in the dark after the community meeting, and said, "I didn't know you knew all of that," at the woman who had told Thomas Beaumont to get off her property, at the woman who was standing in the stable doorway in the evening, asking her sister to choose something for herself for once. "When did you get like this?" Evelyn asked. Maribel almost smiled. "I've been watching you for 2 weeks. It rubs off." She went to the Pendleton after supper. Caleb answered on the first knock. He had his coat off his sleeves rolled to the elbow, papers spread across the table, the post-ruling documentation, the corrected deed filings, the grazing arrangement contracts. He was working. Of course he was working. He looked at her when she came in. Read her face. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." She stayed by the door. "I have something to say, and I want to say it before I think about it too much and decide not to." He set down his pen, turned to face her fully. "Denver is far," she said. "Yes. And I'm not. I've never been the kind of person who asks for things." She said it without apology. "I ask for what I need for the operation, for the horses, for the property. I don't ask for things that are personal. I don't know how." "You're doing it right now," he said quietly. She looked at him. "I don't want you to go without knowing that these 2 weeks, the work, the case, the way you—" She stopped, took a breath, tried again. "You treated me like someone who was worth treating seriously. Not because of my family name or my appearance, or what I could do for you. Because of the work. Because of what I actually was. Her voice was even, but it cost her. I don't take that lightly. The room was very quiet. I know you don't, he said. And I don't know what it means for what comes next. I'm not asking you to have an answer tonight. I needed you to know. Before you go, that it mattered. She looked at him. That you mattered. Caleb crossed the room in 3 steps. He stopped in front of her. Close enough that she could see the steadiness in him that was simply who he was. Not performed, not managed, just the bedrock quality of a man who had decided what he believed in and had not moved from it. I'm not going forever, he said. She looked up at him. The Denver operation needs 3 weeks, he said. Maybe 4. Then the corridor acquisition needs to be managed through its first season, which means someone with operational authority on the ground here needs to be making decisions about the grazing arrangements. He held her gaze. That's going to require me to come back. The arrangements are documented, she said. They can run without Evelyn. His voice was very gentle. I said I'm coming back. Let me say that. She was quiet. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she said, the documents for the corrected deed filings need to go to Webb by Friday. He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. I know. I can prepare them. I know you can. Then I'll do that. She stepped back, toward the door. Her hands were steady. Her chest was full of something she did not have a precise word for, and she was going to carry it home with her and sit with it and let it be real at whatever pace it needed to be real. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Evelyn. She went home through the quiet streets of Red Hollow, and the town was the same town it had been 2 weeks ago, the same buildings, the same dust, the same people behind the same windows. But the ground under it was different. The record was different. The deed descriptions were going to be different in 60 days, and Cord McAllister's northern allotment question was going to work its way into the record after that, and the principle was in place now, documented and ruled upon, and impossible to unfiling that 40 years of reading the wrong description did not make the description right. The truth was in the record. She had put it there. 3 weeks later, Gerald Lawson sat down at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning and opened the real account books without being asked. He did not say anything about it. He just opened them and started reading. She set a cup of coffee beside him and went to start the morning work, and did not make anything of it, because making something of it would have embarrassed him, and embarrassing him would have made him stop, and him continuing was worth more than being right about it. She was in the stable when she heard the wagon coming up the road. She knew the sound of it before she saw it. Not a local wagon, the wrong weight distribution, a heavier rig than most of the county used. She came to the stable door. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard. He had a Denver surveyor's case behind the seat and a crate of documents from the corridor filing, and the particular look of a man who has driven a long way and is not tired in the way that matters. He looked at her. She looked at him. 3 weeks, she said. 4, he said. I said maybe 4. You said 3 weeks, maybe 4. The Denver operation needed an extra week. She crossed the yard, stopped at the wagon's side, looked up at him with the direct honesty that was simply who she was. You came back, she said. I said I would. She put her hand on the wagon rail. The wood was warm from the road. The deed filings went to Webb on Friday, she said. Everything is in order. I know. I received the confirmation in Denver. The grazing arrangements are running. I know that too. He stepped down from the wagon, stood in front of her. Evelyn? I didn't drive 4 days to discuss the deed filings. She looked at him. I know, she said. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she stopped calculating what it would cost. She simply let it be what it was. This man, this yard, this morning. The work they had done together. And the truth they had put in the record, and the thing between them that had no name yet, but did not need one. Some things do not need to be named to be real. This was real. The mare put her head over the stable door and watched them with the patient curiosity of an animal that has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. And the morning went on around them the way mornings do, indifferent and bright, and full of the ordinary grace of a world that keeps moving, whether you are ready for it or not. Evelyn Lawson had spent 8 years keeping things from falling apart. Now, for the first time, something was being built, and she was the one who had laid the foundation.